Hello everyone, welcome to the Geoecologist. I am Dr. Krishnanand and you have been watching my videos on various topics of geography on my channel, the Geoecologist. If you are new to this channel, please for the earlier videos, you can go to our playlist section and check for yourself. And also if you are interested in our paid courses related to geography optional for UPSC, for Master's Entrance Examination and for answer writing for geography optional, you can check out on the Play Store in our app, The Geoecologist, or you can directly go to our website, thegeoecologist.com. And now in today's session on political geography, we are going to look into the topic that is laws of international boundaries and frontiers. So before we go ahead, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you like the video, and also please share the videos with others as well. So now let's understand the details of the laws of international boundaries and frontiers. So first of all, what is a frontier? If you remember the earlier lecture also, we talked about that frontier is the outer orientation. So it basically means the main attention is directed towards the outlying areas. So if this is the center, my outlying areas, my tendency to look outwards, this is where my frontier lies, right? So it means basically which are both a source of danger as well as your prize as well. So you can increase your size of the empire, size of the kingdom, size of the state as well. And if someone else from outside is posing a threat for you as well. So if you observe, boundary on the contrast is inner orientation. It means what? So basically if you look into it, is created and maintained by the will of the state, the central government. It's inward looking. From the periphery towards the center, it's looking inwards. So this is the major difference. Then further if you observe, frontier is a manifestation of course, centrifugal forces, the forces that are looking outwards. On the other hand, the range and vigor of these centrifugal forces is indicated by the boundary. So that's very important. And also if you observe that outer line of effective control that is exercised by the central government, the sovereign government, so this outer line is called the boundary. Right? Then further if you observe, the frontier is an integrating factor. It means that it combines, it integrates, it aggregates the entire area into one, while if you observe the range and vigor of centripetal forces, that is basically indicating the boundary, is also a separating factor. So it's just a perspective that very much is important here, that if you are separating you from the others, self from the others, you are making a boundary, right? So that's the whole point. But frontier is basically an overlapping space. It's looking outwards for expansion, for transition. So these are the basic ideas. Now if you look further into frontier, so frontier can be defined as a politico-geographical area. It means it's political as well as geographical concept lying beyond the defined borders of a political unit. Because political unit is what you say is boundary, where you have your sovereignty and jurisdiction. But for expansion, you need to talk about the frontiers. Right? For instance, European penetration into the Zulu natal area that we talk about, and also in Antarctica. Then further if you observe, the modern day frontiers are available to look into Antarctica as well as Arabian Peninsula. So if you can look into this, so Saudi Arabia is separated from Qatar, UAE, Oman, Yemen by extensive unsettled frontiers. It means very irregularly defined boundaries. These boundaries are not properly defined, rather there is a space in between like a transition zone. So it is a physical as well as a moral concept which is implied looking outwards and moving outwards. So to look into it further, let's observe the Arabian Peninsula as an example. So if you observe this red line here indicates the past frontier, the earlier frontiers of the kingdom that you observe, and these straight lines that you observe here is the modern boundary, and many places these straight lines are also not available. So it means most of them you have a frontier as well as the mix of a boundary. So this is where you observe it. Then further if you look into Antarctica, what's the situation in Antarctica here? If you observe the claim of different countries in the chunks of Antarctica, so Australia has this particular claim here. In between you have a France, then you have the New Zealand here, then unclaimed territories also here, then you have Chile, Argentina, UK claiming some parts of it, then you have Norwegian claim here. So it's like a mix of claim. So what happened when in 1840 Antarctica was discovered, since then it had been the subject of intrigue for international community and everybody wants a chunk of Antarctica. So what happened that because of receding glaciers and further increase in scrutiny, countries started to claim over it. So what happened? You observe the 12 nations that signed Antarctic Treaty on 1st December 1959, right? They were Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Chile, France, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa and USSR alongside United Kingdom and United States of America. So what does it talk about? It says that the treaty provides freedom of scientific research, putting aside nations' territorial claims. So no nation can claim its territory apart from basically the scientific research, and so we say there is a frontier zonation here, not a proper boundary. And also it is a non-militarized space according to the treaty. So nuclear explosions, disposal of radioactive wastes are also prohibited. So it's hailed as one of the first disarmament treaty of nuclear age if you observe. So you have frontiers here. Now let's go to the boundary part. So if you observe, the jurisdiction and sovereignty defines the boundary of a state, which is from the other state. It's clearly distinction. So if you observe, it's not just a line, but also a vertical plane. So what does it mean? If you observe, there is country A and country B here, and if there is an oil resource inside, then how would you divide the oil resource? Because the reserve goes inside, even the water table goes inside. So how will you make a boundary? So then this planar surface is created as, so here is a land boundary, and this also penetrates inside the land so that one country cannot take the resources of the other country. If it's not clearly defined, there will be a dispute, and I'm sure you know there was a dispute. So Belgium, Germany, Netherlands argued over coal resources, Kuwait, and you know the Gulf War, what happened. So you have Iraq and Kuwait spaces which were in trouble, and there was a war because of this particular idea of the oil sharing, because of this not clearly defined boundary segment. Then if you observe the evolution stages of a boundary, so here you will have first to define a boundary. That's the first stage. So document needs to be created that indicates a clear-cut mark, right? Now what I was giving you an example is Iraq and Kuwait. Here you look at these oil fields, the Rumaila oil field and other oil fields. So this transcends the boundary. Now it means you have to create an inside as well. So it has to be in three-dimensional. So the planar structure is very important. So delimitation by cartographers, and then you have demarcation of the boundary properly. This is the evolution. So to make a boundary, look into these steps. So the first step would be to describe the description of the boundary and the terrain through which it runs, and also delimit the space accordingly and make treaties in a formal way. Then the second step is that when treaty makers have completed their definition and boundary in question, then the work of cartographer, the mapping starts with a proper scale and also the plotting of the boundary. So these are the steps involved, and there is a criteria as well. So what are the criteria to demarcate a boundary? The popular criteria that you'll observe, or the general criteria, these are ethnic, language, religion, physical features. These are four major criteria which have been utilized across the world to make different kinds of boundaries between states. If you look into few of them, you'll find in India as well. We have linguistic states in India, isn't it? So that's an example. Now, criteria for ideal boundaries across the world. So these are certain ideal boundaries which does not exist, but the idea is that you should look for the best. So what is the best approach, or what is the ideal approach to create a boundary? So the first one is that it should give you the idea or the sense of unity and also completeness. No cultures within the boundary should feel incompatible or incomplete. It means the representation should be true, right? And then what you observe is the boundary should not isolate the state, that is like historical Great Wall of China and Berlin Wall. These are not the good examples of creating a boundary. Then further, if you observe, the boundary should be affording protection from potential outside forces. That's very important role of a government to set up a boundary like that. And then the boundary should be arrived at mutual agreement. So the parties between which the boundary is being created, they should be at mutual terms. These are basic ideas of the ideal state boundaries creation. So does it happen ideally in the real world? So at the end of this lecture, we are going to talk about some disputes as well. So first, let's look into the boundaries that have the functions. So what kind of functions does a boundary serve to a state? First is the defense function, then protecting state jurisdiction, sovereignty. Then you have a commercial function. For example, the tariff the taxes according to this, and also the competition for its market. Then legal function, of course the legality is involved, and remember the legality can only be given in terms of the government's idea or attempts of controlling the immigration and immigration at points of the borders. So that's very important. And then we also understand that boundary serves as state symbol for sovereignty and fosters nationalism, and also it's very important for administrative purpose. So this is the relevance of the boundaries. Now let's look into some classification of international boundaries, although we'll make a separate video for morphological and genetic classification as well. But here in general way, the first is functional classification, which is also called genetic classification based on cultural landscape evolution, and also second is that forms the morphology, the shape. So physiographic units, you can say mountain or a river, that's morphological classification. And the third one, what you say is geometric boundaries, which are also called straight line boundaries many times, or anthropogenic boundaries. So all these three are different kinds of classes of boundaries and the examples. So in details anyway, we are going to make a separate video. There will be discussing these different kinds of boundaries with example. But for now, the contention here is that international disputes on these boundaries, what causes the problem? If you look here, unitary states, highly centralized state governments where capital city serves as focus of power, example France. So these have the typical state where the boundary control is more stringent. Federal states, a government where the state is organized into territories which have control over government policies and funds. So you observe Poland, Belgium and United States and their boundaries. So you'll observe that under these states and their adjoining areas, there are certain disputes. And then if you observe the Nigeria's federal government, and what happens here? Look at these colors of pink. So what is it? It's Sharia law proclaiming these countries. So these are all the countries where Sharia law is there, and it allows states within the state to determine whether to have a Sharia law or not. So practice of law is also important, and many times you'll find in sub-Saharan Africa there are disputes as well. So legal system based on traditional Islamic laws are followed in certain parts, where you'll observe many of these disputes happening in present as well. So in the next lecture, in continuation to this, we'll be talking more on the classification of different kinds of boundaries across the world. So now, when we have discussed various aspects of the laws of international boundaries and frontiers, in the sessions to come, we'll be also talking about the various kinds of classification of these boundaries. So stay tuned, stay safe, keep watching and learning, keep subscribed, and also please share the videos with others as well.